Good afternoon, welcome back. Thank you for being here, because if you were not here, I would not be here, and I would not be here if you are not here, and we call that reciprocity, and we call that communication. So, it is tradition now. Traditions are very important, and the tradition is that I get undressed before we start. So, if you give the music background, do the musical background. You give me the music, please. No, they tell me you like to sing and dance in Ukraine, so give me a musical background so it helps me too. Huh? And the tie?
Definitely.
Yeah, just the tie? Okay, yes. Okay, that feels better. Good. PowerPoint presentation very fast. We're going to go very, very fast today because in just over 1 hour, I have to make a presentation. It says on my schedule to tell you about how the church communicates, the kind of media that the church uses, digital media, traditional media. I have just over 1 hour to talk to you about 2,000 years of communication. So that's my challenge. Your challenge is to stay with me. Remember, this is a conversation. It is a conversation. And so, at any moment in the conversation, you're invited to put up your hand and say, please explain, I don't understand, tell me more, or you are talking rubbish. I do need to make the same invitation that my colleague Father Bernd made to you earlier. Could you please come in a little bit closer? I feel very lonely here. Would you be very kind? You would make me so happy if you would come in a little closer. I understand you don't want to sit in the front row. No student ever wants to sit in the front row. We learned why yesterday. Do you remember? Do you remember why you don't want to sit in the front row? It's called proxemics. Proxemics. It's the fear, it's the distance. If you can come closer, it just makes things much more intimate and easy, and it makes me feel that we really are having a conversation. Good! Halina, did you translate what it says up there? Communications Italian style. Italian style because the Vatican is in Italy. It's always been in Italy. The Pope lives in Italy, and for nearly 2,000 years, up until 1978, nearly all the popes were, well, lots of them were Italian. I think that the fact of being Italian does have an influence on the way the church communicates. And the title of the presentation is the Vatican's Media, I should say this with an American accent, huh? The Vatican Media Machine. We need some musical background, but there isn't, doesn't it? So, a good story, all good stories begin like this. The best story of all begins like this. In the beginning. What was there in the beginning? 2,000 years ago, how did the church communicate? What did it use? This is what it used. The very first kind of communication, and we've almost forgotten. When you visit beautiful Gothic churches or medieval cathedrals around Europe, I speak for myself. I am very often shocked and surprised when I look around the cathedral and I see where the priest spoke from. High up on a little balcony in the middle of the church. And I think, how did he do it? How did he do it? No microphone, no technology, and he was speaking to people who, at least according to the Latin tradition, before the Second Vatican Council, the tradition was, if you wished to receive communion during the Mass, you had to not drink or eat before midnight of the night before. So imagine going to Mass, you have not eaten, you have not even had a sip of water since midnight from the day before. You have walked to Mass, and you are standing because there are no seats in the church, and you are listening for hours while a man high up over there speaks to you about God. These men, I think, must have been incredible. The capacity to communicate, the power, the voice to reach so many people. No microphone, the gesture. The power that we are losing because now, a little microphone, and we are very shy, and our whole communication tradition has come down. For nearly 2,000 years, we relied on this oral tradition. So sad that we are losing the ability to speak and express what we believe in the oral way. We moved forward and we developed something else. Religion and church understood that most of the people who were standing in that church could not read and could not write. And that is still the case in many countries in the world. We sit here in a beautiful university, surrounded by knowledge and books, and we forget there are still millions of people in different countries in the world who cannot read or write. The country I come from, Italy. In the south of Italy, there are still people who cannot read and cannot write. How do you teach? How do you preach? How do you communicate to people who cannot read or write? You use symbols. And the greatest teacher of symbolic preaching and teaching, his name was? Oh, that's interesting. There's only one person in this Catholic university who knows about it. That's very interesting. I will tell the Vatican when I get home. There is only one person in the Catholic University of Ukraine who knows that Jesus was a teacher. Thank you. Thank you. That's good to know. I'll give you one more chance. One more chance. We have a great example of symbolic teaching in the person of? Jesus Christ. Oh, so now there are two. All right. Third chance, otherwise I'm going home, huh? I'm going home. Really? So, third chance. We have a great example of a symbolic teacher in the person of? Jesus. Oh, thank you. Hey. All right, so, symbolic teaching, the church understood. And we developed something called the visual tradition. And we still have that very much today. We're using it with this. It's a visual tradition. We look, as Father Bernd said to those who were here yesterday, the things we hear, it is easy to forget. Those who were with me yesterday, do you remember the percentage? What do we remember of what we hear? Any? 7. So thank you. Thank you so much. It means you were listening. We remember about only 7% of what we hear, but we do remember what we see. We are very impressed by what we see. That is why we watch television. That's why images are so powerful. The church understood very quickly and used images in every way possible and made glass windows and made frescoes and paintings to teach people who could not read. The wonderful thing is that your grandmother and your grandfather could look at those images and could read and understand those images. We have difficulty reading and understanding images today. We are such a word-based culture. have become such an intellectual culture that very often we forget that the first way we learn is not from here, but from here. And so our grandparents could look and they could recognize all the symbols here. And they knew, they felt, they understood. No one told them. They understood that the circle was God. And the light coming through the church was the Word of God, illuminating their lives. And that God manifests himself in three, which is the Trinity. And they understood symbols and numbers and colors in a way that we have forgotten. With all our knowledge and our intelligence, we have forgotten. There's still so much for us to learn from the visual tradition. But the church moved on. And the church discovered something called writing. And we know when that began. There's a person, there's a name, and there's a date when that began. Here is the man, and his name is Mr. Gutenberg. Exactly. And what did he do? What did Mr. Gutenberg do? He created this machine, very simple machine, and there's the date. That's when he did it. And the first book that he printed using this machine, what was it? No, it was not Harry Potter, no. The first book was, there it is, there it is. And so in 1455, the church begins to forget her oral tradition and to forget her visual tradition, and she gets into the written tradition. And we become a church of the written word. And things change because we become very intellectual, very intelligent. We start using a lot of the head and much less of the heart. And we forget that man you mentioned, what was his name again? What was the man's name? Huh?
Jesus Christ.
Jesus Christ, yeah, that one, yes. Him. That man said, he said it 2 times in 2 of the Gospels. He said it, or Mark writes that he said it, and Matthew writes that he said it. When someone asked him, what is the most important commandment? Do you remember? A teacher, a rabbi, a very intelligent man, a man who could read, a man who was a scholar, an academic, like Father Bennett. A man stood up and he thought, ha, I'll show this Jesus a thing or two. And he says, so, tell me, rabbi, he calls him rabbi, big teacher, big professor. So, what is the most important commandment? He thinks, now I'll get him. And Jesus answers, the first, of course. That's why it's the first. To love God. But do you remember what he says? And he says the same thing in Matthew and in Mark. And in Scripture, where Jesus repeats him the same words, it means it's very important. When you repeat something, it means you want the person to remember. So he says it 2 times. And he says, you must love God with all your heart. He begins with the heart. And then with all your mind. And then with all your strength. But he begins with the heart. We cannot love God with our mind. We love God first with the heart. We love people first with the heart. We spoke about love earlier. Love is an emotion, very difficult to define, as we heard. First you feel, then you think, why am I feeling? Then you put into practice what you feel and what you think. Heart, mind, and action. Fortunately, the church has moved on, and the church tries to learn from its mistakes. And we are now in a phase where we are trying to bring together all these traditions, the oral and the visual and the written, because we understand that the modern person, you, sitting here in front of me today, you need all three, the oral and the visual and the written. And so we continue to use everything possible. We use art, we use music, we use architecture, we use literature, just as we have done for 2,000 years. You know what the statue is, don't you? Do you recognize the statue? It's one of the first statues you will see when you come to visit me in Rome, when I take you to St. Peter's Basilica. It is in St. Peter's, it is in the first chapel on the right-hand side. It was done by probably the most famous Western artist in the world. His name was Michelangelo. And he made the Pietà. And already there he is communicating. He is communicating something through stone. He is communicating God's love. He is communicating Mary's acceptance of God's will through stone. So we're using even stone to communicate a message. But we're moving on. We're moving on. And we're in what we call the modern era. Modern times, the times in which we are living now. And since I only have another 45 minutes to go through now only about 100 years, so we've done 1,900 years. Not bad, in 15 minutes. But these are the most complicated years because these are our years. These are the years that we are living in and that are in recent memory. So I have chosen 5. Do you remember the number 5 from yesterday? Yes, 5 is a very special number. 5 is the number of the human person, and 5 is the number of?
Tворчість. I don't know how to say in English. Tворчість.
Creativity? Creativity. Creativity. It's not a coincidence. There is no such thing as coincidence. Is it coincidence that you're listening to me now? Is it coincidence that I am here? Nothing is coincidence. If it is coincidence, it means it is chance. And if it is chance, nothing has meaning. And if nothing has meaning, goodbye. I must believe, I choose to believe, I want to believe that everything is connected. And that every person sitting here today will hear something different. Each one of you will hear a different message. But I believe and I hope and I trust that each one will take that message like a seed, and that message will grow, and you will carry that message to someone else, and that person to someone else, to someone else. And that is how we change the world. 5. 5 modern media and 5 modern popes. We begin with print because that is how Gutenberg left us, the printed word. And that is what we are relying on. That is what you are relying on. There it is. We begin with print. I'm speaking to people who would like to be journalists one day. Many of you tell me you want to be print journalists. Personally, both Father Bernd and I think that category no longer exists. There's no such thing as a print journalist. There is something called cross-media journalism. The world calls it cross-media. We call it cross-media. It really exists. And it is all of these things together. So the church understands the importance of print, and it creates a newspaper, its own newspaper. And here's the date, and there's a reason for everything. The reason why the church creates its own newspaper in the year 1861 is because it is in that year that Italy is united as a country. And for people who do not study history, that is a big surprise, because you think Italy is such an old country. Yes, it is an old piece of land, but it was many countries in one. Only in 1861, Italy becomes a single nation, and Italy decides its capital city will be the city of Rome. Little problem. Rome belongs to the Pope. And pieces of Italy belong to the Pope. But Italy says, all gone now. Goodbye, Pope. It's all part of Italy. And the Pope is put into a tiny space called the Vatican. Do you know how small the Vatican is? Have you any idea how small the Vatican is? It's about 100 acres. About 100 acres. It would be the size of a very small golf course in Scotland, a very, very small shopping mall in Los Angeles, and the equivalent of, you play football in this country? Yes? Okay, you know what a football field, you play football? The side, if you go on a football field, you go onto a football field and you take with you 1/2 of a postage stamp. And you put half the postage stamp on the football field. That is how small Vatican City is in relation to the rest of the world. That is how tiny Vatican City is. The center of the Catholic Church around the world. That is how tiny. So, you have a pope. Which pope was it? It was this one. His name was Pius IX. And there he is, looking very princely, in a very princely pose. One hand on the cushion, touching the crown, which is the symbol of his power, and the other hand stretching forth, looking towards the future. Very princely pose. And he is the one who creates this newspaper called the Osservatore Romano. A terrible name for a newspaper, because no one can pronounce it. But it didn't matter if they could pronounce it. What was important was what it means. And what it means is the view from Rome. With his newspaper, the Pope is making a political statement. He is saying, okay, so you put me in this little garden called Vatican City, but I still have influence. I can still give the view from Rome, using the medium of the time. That was all he had. He had print. He could create a newspaper, and he did create a newspaper. And through the newspaper, he got his message out to the world. The world continued, and radio was born. The new invention, the great mystery. How was it possible that you could speak over here and be heard over here? It was a mystery how the radio waves worked. But the Pope, at that time, decided he could use it. He needed to use the latest media, the latest technology, which was called radio. And he gave it a very good brand name, Vatican Radio. It's still a very good brand, better than Osservatore Romano. It's a good brand name because it says what it is. It is a radio. It broadcasts from the Vatican. And the Pope's name was Pius XI. And here is Pius XI, looking very popish in his big throne. And from his throne, he speaks to the world. And he speaks with authority. And he speaks with power. And he uses this new medium. And the man he calls to do it is Mr. Marconi, Mr. Guglielmo Marconi, the inventor of radio. The world continues. Radio is a wonderful instrument. It reaches people all across the world. During the Cold War, when there was something called an Iron Curtain dividing Europe, Vatican radio was very often the only means of church communication that was reaching behind the Iron Curtain. Radio Free Europe, Radio Liberty, very often were jammed and blocked. Most of the time, Vatican Radio managed to get through. One of my students at the Gregorian University came from Lithuania. The communist regime in Lithuania was very, very bad, very, very strict. I don't have to tell you how strict. She would tell us how her father, who was not allowed to possess a Bible, not only could not go to church, because of course there were no churches, but he could not possess a Bible. He could have no religious literature, but he had a radio. And the radio was tuned to Vatican Radio. And it was on the table in the kitchen. And he would turn the volume of the radio up. Many times he didn't understand the language. It didn't matter. It was Vatican Radio. It was his connection to Rome, to the Vatican, to the Pope, to the Church, to his faith. And her mother would run from the kitchen to the front door and check every 5 minutes to see if there was the spy on the landing outside, listening at the front door, because her mother was very afraid that the spy would call the police and he would be arrested. And she would run back to the kitchen and say, "Turn the radio down, turn the radio down." And he would turn the radio up, because that was all he could do to say, "This is my faith, this is what I believe, I don't care." And she would cry when she would tell that story. We move ahead to the age of television. The Vatican Television Center was created very late. If you think, television has been around for a long time. It took the Vatican a long time to understand the power of television. They immediately understood the power of print. The Vatican Radio is the first radio, the grandmother of radios. But it took a long time to understand the power of television. And this was the Pope who understood the power of television. He understood the power of the moving image. And he understood that he could travel to any country in the world. He could come to Ukraine, where no one knew, still many don't know, where Ukraine is. And he could bring Ukraine back with him through the power of television. The Vatican Television Center does not broadcast. You can't find the Vatican Television Center on your satellite. The Vatican Television Center simply records and archives all papal activities. Every time the Pope, you see the Pope speaking or on any way, those images are Vatican television. Every time you see, even on Ukrainian television, you see the Pope, those are Vatican television images that the Vatican television makes available to Ukrainian television. When the Ukrainian president or prime minister comes to the Vatican and you see him shake the hands of the Pope, it is Vatican television that is taking those pictures. So we only have a video archive from 1983. Before 1983, there's darkness. We move ahead. And here we are already, into the internet age. And this is the Pope, Benedict XVI, the first Pope to tweet, the first Pope to use an iPad, an iPhone, and there he is. And that is the Vatican website. If you would like to, you can go to the Vatican website and see what it is like, see what it offers. Go to the Vatican YouTube, watch the Pope's activities. You can read the Pope's tweets on his Twitter account. We are still experimenting with the internet age, with the new media age. We go carefully. We wait and see what will happen before we go ahead with something. But we see that these are good and they're useful. And if you read the Pope's Communications Day messages, very often they speak about social media, that these are good and useful. But we must never forget that more good and more useful than the media is the human person. Always, always. Never forget the oral and the visual tradition before the technological. I said 5, didn't I? So where do and we had print, radio, television, internet. So where am I going to put Pope Francis? What kind of medium can I give him? I've already used them all. What medium can I give Pope Francis? Aha. I think it is still a medium. I think through these 3 words, he introduces us, or he takes us back, depending which is your perspective. He takes us back to the oral, visual, tactile, touch, experience kind of communication. The interpersonal communication that we used to have a long time ago. Isn't this picture? Huh? The eye contact, those who were with me yesterday, remember? You have it all. You have the eye contact. You have the smile. You have the touch. You have the proxemics. You have it all in one person and in the way he interacts with the people around him. And he is communicating. And he is communicating very, very strongly. No media, no print, no TV, no radio, no internet. He is the medium. He is the medium. And that is one of the things I would love you to remember when you leave this room this afternoon, is that the media will always change. Once there was print, then there was radio, then there was television, then there was internet. Tomorrow there will be something else. I promise you, there will be something else. I don't know what it is, but you will not change. You, as a medium, will always stay the same. It is your creativity, it is your personality, it is your eyes, your smile, your hands that will communicate most effectively. Do you want to hear more, or are you tired? I will ask you one more time, and then I will put on my jacket. Do you want to hear more? Yes. What do you want to hear? Yes, really, I feel like that. Yes, Earth to Lviv, do you hear me? Come in, please. Or you want to continue? Yeah. Do you have questions? Not yet. Not yet. Then we'll continue. If you're tired, you stop me. Huh? You don't have to stay. You don't have to stay. If you're tired, you're bored, you say thank you very much, and we can go. All right? No. All right?
No.
There are other ways that the Vatican and the Church communicates that are not tied specifically to the medium. They have something called the Press Office of the Holy See. They have a Vatican Information Service. Bernd and my boss, also a Jesuit. If you are a journalist, you will see his name. He is on television all the time. He is quoted all the time. His name is Federico Lombardi. Federico Lombardi, an Italian Jesuit who is the head of Vatican Radio and Vatican Press Office, and until just 2 months ago was head of Vatican Television as well. Now that is power. That means anything the world reads or sees or hears about the Pope, Father Lombardi decides. The most powerful Catholic media man in the world. Now he's just head of the press office and the radio, so. There's something else called the Council for Social Communication. And their job is to think about issues regarding communication and to issue documents on communication. And the documents, these are some of the documents that they issue. The names are always in Latin. What is the word you see most often? What word do you see most often? Ethics, 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 ethics. Their job is to think. Their job is to think about communication and to examine the ethics. Is it right? Is it wrong? Is it good? Is it bad? How must the church be involved in communications? What are the new ideas of communication? The Pontifical Council for Social Communication. Back to the Osservatore Romano. Last night, Father Bernd and I had a very lovely opportunity at the Collegium to meet with students and with the community without a camera, without a microphone, to answer questions about the Vatican and the popes. Were you there? It's a pity, because it was a good opportunity to ask very strong questions and to get very strong answers, truthful answers. One of the questions last night from one of the students who was there concerned issues. How does the Vatican deal with certain issues, especially an official newspaper like the Osservatore Romano? A little while ago, the Pope's newspaper published articles on these four young men, whom I'm sure you don't know because you're too young. You can't know that their names, they were called the... You do know! Then you are older than I think you are. The Vatican newspaper published an article on the Beatles. There they are, the famous Abbey Road photograph. I want to know from you, hands up. Do you think the article in the Pope's newspaper said good things about the Beatles or bad things about the Beatles? We do the Facebook symbol. So, did they like it or dislike it? Okay, what is it? Did the Vatican like the Beatles? Did the Vatican not like the Beatles? What is that? What is that? Huh? What? Did they like or not like? Don't like. Why not?
Because I remember the Beatles said that they are more popular than Jesus Christ.
John Lennon said that. It's true. He was high on heroin at the time, but yeah, but it's true. It's true. He did. The article in the Pope's newspaper liked the Beatles. And they said, yes, we know, John Lennon said, I'm more popular than Jesus Christ, but he didn't mean it. And he was probably high on something at the time, so he didn't understand what he was saying. Huh? They said that the Beatles say good things in their songs. And they influenced many generations. And they have values in their songs. And people said, wow, the Vatican likes the Beatles. A little while afterwards, they did an article on this man. Do you know who he is? Oscar.
Very old people.
These very intelligent young ladies over here. I'm so impressed. Thank you. Thank you. No, I really am. Is the camera on? Yes. No, I'm only teasing. No. if I give a lecture sometimes, I won't say in which countries, to some students who are your age, most of the students will not know who he is. And a few months ago, I was in one of these countries. It's far to the west of you. It's a very big country. And I was surprised because one student put up his hand. And I got so excited, I was so happy. He said, yes, it is Oscar Wilde. I said, that's wonderful. You mean you have read Oscar Wilde? No. Oh, then how do you know? That is the picture in the restaurant in which I'm a waiter. And the restaurant is called Oscar Wilde. Okay, whatever. So, what do you know about Oscar Wilde? No, we can be honest. We can talk. We are grown up here. Huh? Is anybody under 18? No. You're not under 18. So we can use grown-up words and talk about grown-up things. Huh? Oscar Wilde, let us be honest. Huh? He is famous for his wonderful book called The Picture of Dorian Gray and for many, many wonderful things. But he is most famous because he was homosexual. It's true. And he was put in jail because he was homosexual, and he died only 2 years after he came out of jail and never wrote anything again. So he was also died because he was a homosexual in a sense. So, Facebook, did the Vatican like Oscar Wilde or not like Oscar Wilde? May I see? Did the Vatican like Oscar Wilde? Be courageous, come. You must vote, I'm sorry. Come on, you must vote. Huh? Be courageous. Courage. You want to be a journalist? You must be courage. Yes, he did like it. All right. Who did say he did not like Oscar Wilde? All right. Who said they liked it? He liked it? Did you say they liked Oscar Wilde? Yes? Okay, then please tell me why you think the Vatican liked Oscar Wilde.
Maybe you put on this.
Ну, тому що воно би їм подобається гонки.
It's not nice.
Да?
Sorry?
Ви сказали що?
Так.
Питання взагалі надто широке. Чи сподобався, чи не сподобався? Одна річ творчість, інша річ певні патології.
The article, was the article positive or negative? That was the question. Huh? Like or not like, meaning was the article positive or was the article negative? The article was positive. The article was positive and many people were very surprised and very shocked. The article was positive because the last thing that Oscar Wilde wrote, I must shake your hand. This is too good. There's someone who not only knows, but even knows what he wrote. Thank you. The last thing Oscar Wilde wrote was called De Profundis. He wrote it in jail. And De Profundis is an examination of conscience. He converts. And the church loves people who convert. More than anything else, we don't love the sinner, but we love the sinner who converts. And so there is a story of conversion. And so the article was positive. Another example. You won't know who this is. This is a character in a series of books and films. And his name is... But you know so many things here in Ukraine. You are so intelligent. Eh? Yes, Harry Potter. So, quickly, like, dislike. So, did the article like Harry Potter? Show me.
No.
Did the article not like Harry Potter? Show me. Why did it not like Harry Potter?
Тому що магія...
I have to take the mic because I have to listen to you.
Тому що в Гаррі Поттері говориться в основному про магію і не говориться про Бога. Проте, мені б здається, мала бути інша думка, тому що в Гаррі Поттері існують такі поняття, як святкування Різдва та святкування Пасхи. Але Ватикан негативно відноситься через магію.
You're right, of course, yes. They didn't like Harry Potter because they said there was too much black magic. And as my friend Father Hagencourt always says, owls the talk. I love that line.
Sorry?
Owls that talk. Your line about owls that talk. No one, yes. Yes, I love it.
Okay, yes, I have to.
It gives me a chance to have some water.
Yes, please. My line on Harry Potter is that the books are not about magic or anything. We all know that there are no owls that talk, no flying things around. But it's also on friendship and on trust and on development and on growing up and facing the world and facing good and evil and making choices. So this is why I should have read the books.
Yeah, I should have. Okay, it's very interesting because I don't have here. They also wrote an article on the Da Vinci Code and Angels and Demons, Dan Brown, and I won't even ask you if they liked it or did not like it. They did not like it. And not only did they write in the newspaper of the Vatican and say, we don't like Dan Brown, but some very high people in the Vatican did interviews with television and radio and said, it's bad, don't go and see the Dan Brown films, don't read the Dan Brown books. And a few weeks later, the publishers of Dan Brown wrote a letter and said, thank you. Thank you so much. First we sold 5 million copies, now we have sold 50 million copies. Thank you. Here's a copy for you too. And finally, this was very recent. The Osservatore Romano wrote an article on Homer Simpson. Did they like him or not like him? Like? Not like? They loved Homer Simpson. They said Homer Simpson was an example of a good Catholic man. And Mr. Grunig, who does the Homer Simpson cartoons, wrote back and said, what are you talking about? But it made for discussion. It made for discussion. And this is always good communication. It made for conversation. It made for what we're doing here. Some people said, yes, I like. Others said, no, I don't like. And they began to talk. And so they said, is Homer Simpson a good Catholic? What is a good Catholic? You open discussion. And that's one of the powerful things of media. It doesn't end there. The discussion continues. As I said yesterday, I would be very sad if you sit here for 2 days and you go away exactly as you came in. I would like you to go. My dream is that you would go and you would check out Osservatore Romano on Facebook, on the internet. You would look at it and you would continue to discuss. That is what media is for. That is what media is for. It is not meant to say the last word. It is meant to say the first word. In the beginning. Very quickly, here we are, Vatican Radio. There is Benedict in the studio of Vatican Radio, and these are the popes of Vatican Radio. The man who opened Vatican Radio, here he is, Pius IX, with Mr. Marconi.
11.
And Pius XI, thank you, with his first microphone. Pius XII, who followed him. John the 23rd, who followed him. Paul VI, who followed him. John Paul I, John Paul II, Benedict, and now Francis. Each pope using the radio in a different way according to the moment in history. Pius using the radio as a way to get his message across the world, using this new instrument. Pius XII using the radio during the Second World War. Vatican Radio was the first and perhaps one of the only radio stations in the world that spoke about the concentration camps in Nazi Germany. Because many of the Allies thought it was not politically correct to speak about it, Vatican Radio spoke about the concentration camps. At one time, Hitler's propaganda minister, Mr. Goebbels, thought that Vatican Radio was so dangerous to the Nazi propaganda campaign that he asked for Vatican Radio to be bombed, to be destroyed. There was one time that that nearly happened. It wasn't a German fighter, it was a fascist fighter plane that overflew the Vatican with one bomb that missed. So we're still there. Paul VI, John the 23rd, used the Vatican Radio to announce the opening of the Second Vatican Council that changed the way the Church communicated. Paul VI used Vatican Radio to close the Second Vatican Council and to travel. He was the first pope to fly on an aircraft. Paul VI. He went to all the continents. He went to Africa, Australia, the United States. He spoke at the United Nations. John Paul I, only 33 days. He used Vatican Radio to give his most scandalous speech in his short pontificate. And that scandalous speech was when he spoke about God as our mother. He said, God loves us with a mother's love, with that unconditional love that will never criticize, will always accept whatever we do, a love that we associate with the mother. Many people were very upset about that. John Paul I. John Paul II used Vatican Radio in his travels around the world. He traveled, they say, if you put all his travels together, the kilometers are the same as if John Paul II traveled to the moon and back twice. And there he is, Pope Francis. We have to wait and see how he wants to use Vatican Radio. But you cannot speak about Vatican Radio without remembering Mr. Marconi, who was the inventor of the radio. He was very famous. He was so famous, in 1912, he won the Nobel Prize for Physics. And when Pope Pius XI invited him to build this radio station, it was as though he were inviting Steve Jobs to come and set up the Vatican's communication. Yes, that would be the equivalent. That's how famous he was. And he became very famous. He was on the front page of Time magazine because of something that happened in 1912. A ship called the Titanic went down. Who has seen the movie? Who has not seen the movie? In full HD, 3D? Yes? Good. There's a scene in the movie as the ship is going down in the control room, and you see the sailor and he's tapping out the message, which the ship nearby, the Carpathia, picks up the message and comes and finds the survivors. In the movie, as the ship is going down, the water is coming in and he's tapping away and he drowns and sacrifices himself. That machine is a copy of a machine designed by Marconi. And in the history, the real man aboard the Titanic was a man who was working for Marconi's company. And after the Titanic wreck in 1912, it became maritime law that every ship crossing the Atlantic must carry this technology and a Marconi machine. He was so famous, when he arrived, he was in New York when the survivors arrived on the dock. And his daughter, whose name is Electra, there she is, is Marconi with his wife, and little Electra Marconi. She tells the story of how her father came to greet the survivors, who recognized that it was thanks to him and his invention that they were alive, because otherwise everyone would have frozen to death and drowned in the water. And so the first thing they did was they pulled the buttons off his coat to take away his souvenirs, and then they carried him on their backs to his hotel on Fifth Avenue in Triumph, because he was such a hero. This was the man the Pope called to create his radio station for him. Electra Marconi, would you like to see what she looks like today? There she is. There she is inside the Vatican Radio Museum that still has the original machinery and technology of Guglielmo Marconi. So you have three pieces of history. You have the technology, you have Electra Marconi, and you have this man. Yes, that one. Vatican Television. Vatican Television, as I say, it films all the Pope's audiences. It's what allows you to get close to the Pope when you see him at his window, when you see him. Now, we even have the Vatican Television on the Pope's car. So you see things from very close up. And this is important in terms of communication and in terms of proxemics. And that is why we had the lesson yesterday, because everything is connected, you see. I didn't do that exercise with proxemics just to hurt you. I'm very grateful that you allowed me to do that. Television breaks the proxemics. So the previous popes were very far away. Very far away. The sense of the Pope was someone who very far away. Now, thanks to television and a television camera that is right next to the Pope, you have the impression that you are also right next to the Pope. And so when he hugs somebody, you feel like he is hugging you. And this is new. This is new for television, for the Vatican, for communications, for proxemics. Distances are being broken down through the medium. This is the Vatican internet site. This is what it looks like. The Vatican website. There's John Paul using his laptop. The Vatican Twitter. Vatican YouTube. Yes. The Vatican moving in to this digital age, very carefully waiting to see what happens. Facebook. I speak in terms of the English, my English programming that goes to the whole world, because the whole world speaks English. Facebook was a big decision for us because it's uncontrollable. And this is new too. Everything I've told you until now is controllable. You can control what the newspaper writes. You can control what the radio broadcasts. You can control what the people see on the television. And that was very important when John Paul II became old and sick. Because when he became old and sick, it was not a pretty thing to see. And if he was my father or my grandfather, I would not want the world to see him up close with the mouth and with the pain and with the suffering. But because the Vatican TV controlled the image, if you look at the images of John Paul II in the last months, you will see they are all from a distance, a respectful distance. We spoke earlier today about values, a respectful distance. If we allowed any television, what would they do? You would look for the sensation, wouldn't you? And so you would go right in and want to see all the... No. So, these are all media that we can control. We cannot control the new media. We cannot control the internet. I cannot control what people say and how they respond to the Facebook page. So, we have a very strong filter. We have a vocabulary, a list of words that you may not use. And if you write something with that word, automatically it just does not appear on the Facebook site. And we monitor the Facebook page very closely. And when people say bad things, which we do, which they do, we don't, they say bad things, we were very worried to begin with. We said, what will we do when people say bad things? Does that mean I have to be, as the head of the department, spend my life answering and saying, no, this is not true. You may not say that. Please do not be rude. The rules. No, you know what we discovered? I don't have to say anything. Because the wonderful thing about Facebook is, when people say bad things, one person says, the Pope is a bad man, 10 people write back and say, you stupid, get off this page, why do you say that, you don't know what you're talking about, blah, 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 and I sit back and go, thank you. So this has been a positive experience. The YouTube is different. Can we switch off now? I'm saying some... Can we...